Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Richard Henry, and since September, I have been undertaking a PhD looking at the late Roman period. The particular aim of my study is to consider coinage and material culture from the Valentinianic period and onwards. So the dates that I'm looking at are basically 364 to 425 AD. A lot of the interest that I have in this period stems from working with the Portable Antiquities scheme. So I worked as a fines liaison officer principally in Wiltshire, and what kind of piqued my interest more than anything else was a lot of the late Roman material that was coming up. And what I want to do is talk about today some of the elements that I'm considering at the moment as part of my research, but then also as other speakers during the conference are discussing similar elements, I wanted to talk about how I've undertaken some of the things and kind of consider potential bias and limitations in the data sets as well. So, for example, a number of the elements that I'll be talking about are going to be potential issues or pitfalls with the Portable Antiquities scheme data, but also highlighting the quality of the data set as well. And then I will also just explain some of the methods of analysis that I've already started undertaking. As I'm only 6 months in, I haven't got a huge amount of initial data that I can present, but I can at least highlight to everybody what I'm doing and kind of the approaches I'm looking to take. Regional trajectories are something that you see throughout the Roman period, but in my view, it's particularly important in the later 4th and early 5th century, because by evaluating regionalization, different styles of material culture, and also the value that people have placed upon specific objects, potentially only in specific areas, we might then start being able to understand and further develop our understanding of what's going on in the late Roman period and the value that certain people are ascribing to late Roman objects. And I suppose the one that's really coming to mind right now is the fact that you often, I say often, I've seen a couple of belt fittings where they have been repaired with other Roman objects, not simply just a piece of copper alloy, but you have repairs that are being made from bracelets. And what does that tell us both about the value that's been ascribed to the belt fitting, but also to the value that's been ascribed to the bracelet? Is it that they've just utilized an object or two objects that are broken to repair a second one, or is there something more complicated going on? And so as part of my methodology, I don't just want to consider different objects and then plot them on the map. I want to see how they interrelate, and also then to see if there are similarities between a range of different objects, for example, in decorative styles. So I think because we have such large data sets available to us now, by evaluating as much as possible, hopefully we'll start being able to see new kind of opportunities to understand different objects. So for example, my main objects that I'm going to look at are likely to be coinage, the belt fittings, late Roman brooches, combs, bracelets, and other forms of material culture, particularly relating to personal ornament, but also objects such as hoards. So it's not just coin hoards, but hoards of objects, all the way from kind of silver plate down to ironwork. And each one is going to be important and be deposited for a particular reason. And so by looking at all of these data sets and also considering how they interrelate in some form, for example, talking about the belt fitting and also how that's been repaired with a fragment of bracelet, what value's been ascribed to these objects, but also are there links in terms of decorative styles that can start informing us in a way that we haven't necessarily thought about in the past. So for example, I'm seeing similar decorative styles on bone bracelets in comparison to late Roman belt fittings. And so on a national scale, with lots of different data sets that I've been very lucky, I must say, and lots of people, and I'm very grateful the fact that people have shared a lot of their raw data to allow me to do this. But then by considering lots of different objects in the same study, can we start seeing different nuances that haven't appeared in the past? And that's kind of a key area, and I think a key value of the research that I'm doing. I didn't want to just talk about the overarching aims that I have of the project and what I'm looking to achieve. I also wanted to talk about what I've done so far and highlight some of the areas that I thought might be useful for other people. For example, tomorrow morning, Andrew Brown and Sam Moorhead are going to talk about coinage in the Southwest. If you were then really interested and wanted to start kind of looking into it yourself, how reliable is the portable antiquities scheme data set straight off, for example? And what can you do with the data? And so the next few slides are going to be me just starting to pull together some of the different things that have been coming to mind, and I've also kind of noticed whenever I have kind of started data cleaning. So there are almost 100,000 coins that I've recorded from the Southwest. I think the total is 98,000 so far, and it's a combination of the Portable Antiquities Scheme, the Roman Rural Settlement Project, and also comparative sites that were collated by Philippa Walton. I've only included coins that can either be assigned a Rees period or an A, B, C, D, E period in this 100,000 total. But it just highlights it's a lot more coins than I was expecting for the Southwest. When I first did the data collection, I was thinking perhaps you'd have about 50 to 60,000, but it took me by surprise. And so I wanted to kind of explore the portable antiquities scheme data in a bit more detail, and that's kind of what we're going to talk about for the next few minutes. So I used to work for the Portable Antiquities Scheme, so I've used the database a lot, but I've also used it for research a great deal. And if you asked me how reliable is the initial data, I would say it was very good. But I thought this was actually a good opportunity for me really to test this theory out. So what I did is I did a search for just coins from the Southwest, and then on every single database search results, you get on the right hand side of the results, you get a breakdown of Rees periods. But this is the number of records, very importantly, rather than the number of coins. So there were a certain amount of records from Rees period 17, but if you loaded them up, there may be an extra 500 coins in there. But what I wanted to see was if I compared the raw data that you see on the right hand side of the search bar with the final results, how similar are they and how reliable is the data set itself? And I thought this was just going to be a really interesting question to kind of pose. So when I undertook the initial search in the Southwest, there were 24,669 records that arrived. And this is important to note because, as I mentioned a minute ago, there were potentially multiple objects recorded in each record. So part of the evidence that you'll see in the data clean section is the fact that you're just comparing records with the number of objects. They've been split by A, B, C, D, E period, and what you can see is that broadly there are increases in all the different areas, which is good, and there's no massive changes. And when I was going through the whole of the database, data cleaning took approximately 2 weeks, and the main change that I found was that I would be adding in Rees periods for older records, and this is not potentially a surprise, but it also just highlights the quality of the data that's actually being recorded with the Portable Antiquities Scheme. I also went through and checked at least 100 records from each county just to make sure that the quality of the data was actually reflected with what I was looking at, because I was looking at all of the coins within a CSV file so that they could then be mapped in GIS. Here I have presented a graph that's evaluating the Reese period breakdowns for the raw data set that we saw a minute ago, and also the final data set that I've been using as part of the study. And I think the really important take-home message with this particular graph is that when you look at them, the data sets are very similar, which highlights that in terms of just the basic information that you can get from the portable antiquities scheme before you start delving into it is of a really good quality. And it's always nice to know that when you start investigating something and you think you're going to see certain results, that they are actually visible. And it really does highlight the value of the portable antiquities scheme. There are areas that we have to consider when we also map the portable antiquities scheme data. And so here we have two kernel density estimates broadly highlighting the same data set, and it is showing the concentration of coins from the late Roman period. On the left hand side, I've included Carwent, which has 6,000 coins from a very small area, and on the right hand side it's been excluded. And I think this is likely more than anything else to highlight the challenges that we'll face in mapping the late Roman period, as if we were to include Richborough on such a density, there'd be 22,822 coins from a very small area. And so instead, I've decided to map sites by parish profile. And this is in part so that areas such as Richborough won't heavily affect the data set. Otherwise, you'd see a massive red splodge here. But also, not all sites by any means have 22,822 Roman coins from them. And so we want to be able to compare and contrast areas where there's vast quantities of coins with areas where you actually only see a handful. One of the elements that I am intending to look at as part of my PhD is considering sites or parishes that have above or below average in terms of coin loss in the late Roman period. And the way that's been defined is by evaluating the mean produced by Philippa Walton excluding Richborough, and that's because Richborough has such a large influence on the late Roman period when you add it to any Reese period graph. And then mapping sites that have coin loss per mil that's above the figure of the national average, which is 148. So here you can see that there are only two parishes in Devon and Cornwall that have above average coin loss, whereas in contrast to the east of the River Parrett, you have a vast number of parishes that have above average coin loss. Mostly they're concentrated around the road network, but also in Wiltshire you see a lot of sites that show high coin loss into the Roman period that are based around river valleys instead. And I think this also highlights trends that you can see within the data itself. So you can see areas where there's an increase in coin loss, such as in North Wiltshire, but also you can see very few coins that have been lost in areas that have been linked to showing a gradual decline from the years 350, and this will be visible in the next slide. It was noted by Sam Moorhead that between Salisbury and Purbeck there was a general trend for declining coin loss from 350, and this is also visible in other areas. For example, you can see a tight concentration in the area around the River Parrett over here, but also in Devon and Cornwall, and these declines or below average coin loss and also above average coin loss for different areas really does warrant further investigation. So the eagle-eyed among you will notice that this figure does not look like any of the others that I've included in this talk so far. And it's because what happened is after lunch, I thought, well, that is an interesting section that I was kind of mentioning previously, where I was talking about areas that declined in coin loss around here. And so one major advantage of pre-recording your talks is that you can add in extra slides, which is what I've done here. And this region here, there were lots of areas that had kind of evidence for parishes with below average coin loss. And it also corresponds with an area that is part of a paper that I was writing for the Dorset proceedings. I noted that you have a lot of late Roman hoards, particularly coin hoards, and this is what you can see with the squares on the dots. The dots are late Roman silver coins and the squares are late Roman coin hoards. And at the time I noted that there was an interesting concentration around about Taunton, but also by the river Parrett, which has been suggested as being a boundary in the late Roman period by Roger Leach. And my conclusion at the time was that these coins were probably evidence not just of agricultural wealth, but also mineral wealth. And I linked them in some form to either kind of lead extraction or silver extraction in the Mendips. And I'm not suggesting that these coins were produced using metal from these regions. I'm just suggesting that, or suggested at the time, that this might relate to kind of the wealth from this extraction. And I think it also highlights quite nicely again what I was kind of, one of the areas that really piqued my interest in terms of the late Roman period was the late hoards that you see in particular regions, and one of them that we often see them was Wiltshire. So an area that I'm going to look into as part of my PhD is also considering evidence of coin use after 400. So most of the mints had stopped producing copper alloy coins by 395, and by 402 you see that there's a lot less coins produced in silver. But in Wiltshire and in other areas as well, you still see evidence of coin hoards, and also coins that potentially are still being used because of the phenomenon of clipping. And so one of the main aims I've got is, by combining lots of different evidence and not just thinking about kind of the distribution of silver coins and silver coin hoards, as you can see here, that when you actually start looking at it as part of a wider whole, you start to notice interesting things. And I suppose that's one advantage of what I'm doing, is that I've already kind of realised that some of the areas that I've noted as being unusual in terms of hoards were actually also unusual in other ways, because there was evidence of decline. And perhaps now it would mean that in the future I'd revise what I suggested about how I was linking it to the material, the mineral wealth. It could be that actually you've got objects and coins being hoarded for entirely different reasons. Building on the evidence so far that I've collected in terms of coins and coin hoards, I also thought it would be interesting to show what I've done so far in terms of other data sets. With crossbow brooches, I've added in all of the data from the corpus collected by Don McCreth, and in due course I will also tie in other data sets such as the Portable Antiquities scheme. All of the figures you can see here, it's just the general type. I haven't broken it down into individual typologies so that you can start seeing nuances within the data set. And this, I think, is particularly important with the belt fittings, because you'll start to see different types in different regions, and there is a huge amount of regional variation as well. And this is particularly important in Cirencester and around Cirencester. So the area between Carwent and part of Hampshire is going to be one of my study areas, roughly about here. And I want to compare a range of different things that I already know kind of is occurring as different trends. So, for example, although you have a large concentration of coinage from the late Roman period here, this is reflected in silver coins, but the concentration isn't as visible when you consider clipped coins, and these are coins that are likely to have been clipped after 400. So you can see some form of change in the late Roman period, and I want to investigate this further. But also Cirencester has, the area around Cirencester has one of the largest concentrations of belt fittings. And so when you start tying together all these different pieces of kind of information, what can we find out that's going to tell us about what's happening in this period? And by looking at different decorative styles, the reuse of objects, repairs, can we start kind of building a narrative of how objects are being used in the late Roman period, but also what they might tell us about the change and transformation that occurs in the early 5th century. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll be around for questions afterwards, but my email was in the first slide, and so if you do kind of want to get in touch, or if there's other data sets that you think I should include or other elements that you think should be incorporated, please feel free to get in touch, and thank you very much for listening.